Yesterday, we reviewed MLA formatting and style guide, looking specifically at how you set up an MLA document and how you use, insert, and how to identify in-text citations. Today, we're going to look at works cited and the basic rules that you would use to create a works cited entry and what a works cited list looks like. So we know that if we are writing a paper and we want to include a source, so that could be a novel that you're discussing or a website article to back up a point you're trying to make, that we would use in-text citations as evidence, and that we would then need to include a works cited entry, creating a works cited list of those sources. So to create a works cited entry, you would include these pieces of information. Each entry in the list of works cited is made up of core elements given in a specific order. The core elements should be listed in the order in which they appear here. Each element is followed by the punctuation marks shown here. So if I wanted to discuss To Kill a Mockingbird in an essay, I would use evidence from the book and include that in an in-text citation. So I would use a quote in a paragraph and include the author and the page in which I found the quote, and that would be my in-text citation. Well, in a works cited list, I need to include the publication information as well. That way, if a reader of my essay wanted to read the book or verify my information, they could find that specific book and double check what I say. So you would include the author, the title of source, the title of container. So what is containing this article? What is containing this book? Other contributors, a version, a number, a publisher, a publication date, and location. You will notice that this is a lot of information to include in a works cited entry. Sometimes when you are looking at a website article, there may not be some of these pieces of information listed. And if not, that's okay. And we will explain that in the following slides. So the first thing that you list in a works cited list is the author. So you begin the entry with the author's last name, followed by a comma, and the rest of the name as presented in the work. And then you end this element with a period. You will notice here that there are several elements. And because there are several elements listed in such a way that it appears as if it's a sentence, you need to be able to signal to your reader where one piece of an element begins and ends and another begins and ends. So after the author, I'm going to put a period. So I know after I read an author's name and there's a period there that I'm then going to look at the title of the source. So your punctuation indicates that a new element is beginning. So here's an example. Naomi S. Barron wrote, Redefining Reading, the Impact of Digital Communication Media. So that is the author of this work that I included in an essay or publication. So because I do the last name followed by a comma and the rest of the name, it appears as Barron, comma, Naomi, and then her middle initial and a period. So I ended that element, so the author's name, with a period, and then here begins the title of the work, which is what would come next in a works cited entry. Here's another example. Alan Jacobs wrote The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction. So we list the last name and then the first. So Jacobs, Alan, period. That signals to me that that is the author, and that is the end of that first element. After the author, we have the title of source. So books and websites should be in italics. Holmichael Stephanie, or Stephanie Holmichael, wrote so many books. Because this is either a website or a book, we put it in italics. So many books which was published from 2003 to 2013, and it's a website. So this is a website, and we indicated that by the italics. Marin Tova Lynette wrote Modernism, Feminism, and Jewishness, which was published from Cambridge, UP in 2007. So we do last name, comma their first name, and then in italics we have this book. Periodicals, so journal, a magazine, or a newspaper article. Television episodes and songs should be in quotation marks. So where it says newspaper article, this could also be a website article. So think about how you receive news now instead of the Times Tribune, which you may read. A lot of the news that you read could come from Fox News, so then that would be a website article. But these go in quotation marks. So the song Pretty Hurts by Beyonce goes into quotation marks. And then Anne Goldman wrote Questions of Transport, reading Primo Levi, reading Dante. This came out of a journal, so a scholarly journal database where there's listed works pertaining to one specific thing, and that is the title of that article. And then you have the title of a container. So Patrick Bazin wrote Toward Meta Reading. This article came from the future of the book. So this is the container. The future of the book contains this article. So if I were on a website and I was reading an article from a website, the website would be the container. Stephanie Holmichael wrote The Reading Brain, Differences Between Digital and Print. The container of this article is So Many Books, which is the blog that we referenced here. So The Reading Brain, Differences Between Digital and Print is an article that she wrote in this blog or this website. In this last, when that disappears, in the last example, you have Under the Gun. So this comes from the TV show Pretty Little Liars, which does not have an author. So Pretty Little Liars is the show, so it is the container of Under the Gun, that specific episode. So container can look different based upon what it is containing. Pretty Little Liars is the container of the specific episode Under the Gun. So Many Books is the container of the article The Reading Brain. And then the future of the book is a book that is the container of Towards Meta Reading. So either a short story or an article that came from this book. You'll have other contributors at times. So Roger Chartier wrote The Order of Books, Readers, Authors, and Libraries in Europe between the 14th and 18th centuries. So that is the title of the book. The book is translated by Lydia Cochrane. So Lydia Cochrane is another contributor, and she is notable within this piece of work because she translated it. So she needs to be identified. Hush, which is an episode from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was created by Josh Whedon, and it has the performance by Sarah Michelle Gellar. So those are other contributors in this episode. And then Virginia Woolf wrote Jacob's Room, and it is annotated with an introduction by Vera Navarro. Because she annotated the book and she included an introduction, she is notable in this work, so she needs to be identified. Sometimes you have different versions of a work, so if a source is listed as an edition or a version of a work included in your citation. So a great example is the Bible. There are different versions of the Bible. So the Bible listed here is Authorized King James Version. Because it is a specific version of the Bible, you need to identify that in the citation. Horace Newcomb is the editor of the television The Critical View, and it is the 7th edition. Think of magazines that you've read. There are multiple editions of a magazine. So the television The Critical View, that is the 7th edition of this specific publication. And then Ridley Scott directed The Blade Runner, which was performed in 1982. And then underneath that, we have a director's cut of the movie that was published in 1992. So we have two different versions or editions of this work, and they need to be identified. A version or an edition often won't be listed if you are looking at an article in a website. So if a lot of the sources that you use to provide evidence in an essay come from like the New York Times, sometimes you will not have a version or an edition listed. If that's the case, you just don't include that in the citation. But if you are using something and it clearly indicates that it is a specific edition or version, you do need to include that in your citation, like the Bible. Sometimes numbers are included. So if a source is part of a numbered sequence, such as a multi-volume book or journal with both volume and issue numbers, those numbers must be listed in your citation. So Naomi Barron wrote Redefining Reading, the Impact of Digital Communication. It is volume 128, so that's the volume of this book, and we're talking about the number 1 thing listed in this volume. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in this episode, Hush, we are looking at season 4, episode 10, so that's the number that's included in that. And then Renee Wellick wrote A History of Modern Criticism, and this is volume 5, so that is the number that you include. Another good example of this is think about To Kill a Mockingbird. In To Kill a Mockingbird, the last book is divided into 2 movies. So that would be an example of using numbers to indicate what you're talking about. You always want to include the publisher. So the publisher produces or distributes the source to the public. If there is more than one publisher and they are all are relevant to your research, list them in your citation separated by a /. So Charles Harris wrote Teeny, a woman in a paisley shirt behind counter in record store, which is the container of Teeny. And it came from Teeny Harris Archive from the Carnegie Museum of Art, Pittsburgh. So the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh and Teeny Harris Archive are the publishers. Alan Jacobs wrote The Pleasure of Reading in an Age of Distraction. Oxford University Press published The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction. So that is the publisher, and they need to be identified. Fran Rebel Couzet is the director of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was published by 20th Century Fox. So that is who published or who presented Buffy the Vampire Slayer, produced. And then you have the publication date, so you need to list when it was published. So Painting by the Numbers by John Belton was published spring 2008. This Hush episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer was produced in 1999. So if you have a date, you need to use it and go with the one that is most relevant, either to your research or the most recent. Be as specific as possible in identifying a work's location. So on Monday of last week, it was published by Alfred A. Knopf, which is a publisher, in 2009. It does not have where it was published, but if it's given to you, you do need to use it. So the best example comes down here at the bottom. It says The Train from Romer Bearden was published by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So if it gives you a place of publication, you do need to put that down. Because you could have a publication of Harry Potter that was published in New York or London. In your works cited entry, you would need to identify where it was published because it can be relevant to the research or to the information you are giving a reader. And then optional elements, the date of original publication. So when it was originally published versus the most recent date of publication, you could include that. and the city of publication, which is the location that we were talking about a few minutes ago, which is for Conversation of Goethe with Eckermann and Surratt. It was published in London. You could include URLs or DOI, so the digital object identifier. So you could find a DOI from a specific educational database, and then a URL is the link to which you would find an article. And then I want you to always include the date of access. So that is the date that you read the article, or you watched the show, or you read the book. So you do that by saying accessed on, and then you give the date, the month, and the year. And that is the end of this. So again, you use MLA documentation to help provide information and to validate what you say. So if you are discussing a book, to make your discussion of the book valid, you need to provide evidence. And to provide evidence, you want to give in-text citations of quotes or paraphrase material. And then you want to give the works cited entry showing where the work came from so that others can identify that as well and validate your information.